In the dust-blown Dead Fields of Grayrock, a widowed schoolteacher was about to confront more than just local ridicule. What started as a desperate bid at a county land auction took a shocking turn when she came face to face with a buried city of the dead. Miriam Duvall wasn't your typical schoolmarm. For years, she had spent her life shaping young minds. Known for her quiet resilience and a sharp intellect inherited from her scholarly father, when she encountered carved stones whispering through the sand, she had no idea she was walking into danger. Miriam pressed forward with trembling resolve, a decision that would lead to unearthing an ancient necropolis brimming with treasures and secrets long forgotten. What began as a widow's gamble with her last $7 would become a struggle for history itself. The town of Grayrock would never be the same after Miriam revealed the burial treasures that powerful men were willing to kill for, and the forbidden knowledge they were meant to guard. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Miriam Duvall stood at the back of Halford's general store, clutching $7 bills in her palm so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. The land auction was nearly finished, and laughter rippled through the crowd as Thaddeus Cromley, the town auctioneer, reached the final parcel. Next and last, "We have 5 acres of the Dead Fields," Thaddeus announced, his voice dropping with deliberate theatricality. That stretch of nothing but dust and broken rocks out past Widow's Creek, starting bid $1. He chuckled, scanning the crowd of farmers, merchants, and land speculators who had gathered for the county's quarterly property auction. No hands went up. "Come now," Thaddeus continued. "Surely someone wants this fine piece of dessert?" More laughter. "The county's taken ownership on account of unpaid taxes. Previous owner died, claiming there was something special out there. Clearly found nothing but heat stroke." From his seat in the front row, Ezekiel Voss, town councilman and owner of the largest dry goods business in the county, twisted around to survey the crowd with practiced nonchalance. His eyes, sharp as a crow's, landed on Miriam for just a moment before moving on. $1. "Anyone?" Thaddeus pleaded. The county would surely appreciate being relieved of this worthless tract. Miriam's heart hammered against her ribs. Her father's journal had mentioned those ruins, the strange stones half buried in sand, arranged in patterns no local tribe had ever claimed. In his final days, fevered and weak, he'd whispered about doorways and chambers that predated anything in the history books. "I'll take it for $2, she said, her voice stronger than she'd expected. The crowd turned almost as one, expressions ranging from amusement to pity. School teachers weren't meant to bid at auctions, especially not widowed ones with teenage daughters to support. "Mrs. Duvall," Thaddeus said, his bushy eyebrows raised high, "you sure about that? Nothing out there but rattlesnakes and broken rocks." $3, she countered, stepping forward. Someone snickered. Miriam's finally lost her mind. All those books finally addled her. $4, came an unexpected voice from the front. Ezekiel Voss had half-turned in his chair, one manicured hand raised slightly. Miriam felt her stomach tighten. Voss never bid without purpose. "5, she said firmly. "6, Voss replied without hesitation. The crowd had gone silent now, sensing sport in the unlikely bidding war. Miriam clutched her final $1, the last of her savings after paying for Leora's school supplies. $7, she said, holding the bill aloft. Voss turned fully now, his eyes calculating as he studied her. After what seemed an eternity, he smiled thinly and inclined his head. "All yours, Mrs. Duvall." Thaddeus blinked in surprise, then recovered. "Sold to Mrs. Duvall for $7. He struck his gavel with unnecessary force. "May you find whatever it is you're looking for out there in that wasteland." More laughter followed, but Miriam barely heard it as she walked forward to sign the deed. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrote her name on the paper that would give her legal ownership of the place her father had spoken of with such reverence. As the crowd dispersed, Voss approached, his expensive boots clicking purposefully across the wooden floor. "Interesting choice of investment." Mrs. Duvall, he said, his voice honeyed with false concern. Those lands have quite a reputation. Nothing but old stones and bad air. Then I'm surprised you bid on them at all, Mr. Voss, Miriam replied, tucking the deed into her satchel. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Mere curiosity. But should you find the property overwhelming, my offer stands at $10. A fair profit for you. Before she could respond, a flurry of motion announced her daughter's arrival. Leora Duvall, 16 and fierce as summer lightning, pushed through the lingering townsfolk to reach her mother's side. Is it true? She demanded, breathless from running. You bought the Dead Fields? Your mother has made an interesting acquisition, Voss said before Miriam could answer. Though what a schoolteacher and a young lady might want with such desolation escapes me. Leora squared her shoulders, her chin lifting in a gesture so reminiscent of her late father that Miriam's heart clenched. My mother doesn't make mistakes, Mr. Voss. If she wants that land, she has good reason. Voss's smile tightened. Indeed, well, I'll leave you ladies to your property management. He tipped his hat and departed, but not before casting one last assessing look at the deed in Miriam's satchel as they walked home through town. Whispers followed them like shadows. Throwing away good money? Her husband would never have allowed such foolishness. That poor daughter. Leora walked closer to her mother, her arm linked protectively through Miriam's. Why did you buy it? She asked quietly. Is it because of grandfather's stories? Miriam nodded, her eyes fixed ahead. Your grandfather wasn't a man given to fantasy. Leora, if he believed something was out there, then something is. That evening as the sun sank toward the horizon, Miriam stood alone on her new property. The dead fields stretched before her, 5 acres of sand-swept stone and scrub brush. Most would see only wasteland, but Miriam's eyes were drawn to the faint patterns, the way certain rocks aligned too precisely to be natural, how the ground dipped in geometric depressions that rain and wind shouldn't form. She moved deeper into the property, following what might once have been a path. The setting sun cast long shadows from the larger stones, creating lines that converged toward the property's center. There, half buried in sand and time, she found what she'd come for, the faint outline of a carved doorway, its surface etched with symbols that had no business in this part of the world. Miriam knelt beside it, brushing sand from the carvings with trembling fingers. You were right, Father, she whispered to the dying light. It was here all along. You're sure no one followed us? Miriam asked, glancing back toward the narrow track that served as a road to the dead fields. Leora, already scrambling ahead among the ruins, snorted. Who would bother? Everyone thinks we're crazy. She paused, balancing atop a fallen column. Except maybe Mr. Voss. He's too smart to think we're crazy, which is worse. Miriam couldn't argue with that assessment. They'd come prepared this time, shovels, brushes, lanterns, and the leather-bound journal of Miriam's father. Its pages filled with sketches and observations from decades earlier. Look at these. Mother? Leora called, crouching beside a half-buried stone. They're like the drawings in grandfather's book. Miriam joined her daughter, kneeling despite the protest in her knees. The symbols carved into the stone were unmistakable. The same flowing script her father had copied meticulously, the origin of which he'd never been able to determine. Not indigenous to the region, not Spanish or Mexican, not even reminiscent of old-world languages. Help me clear this area, Miriam said, unslinging her pack. Your grandfather believed these marked an entrance. They worked through the morning, brushing sand from stone, revealing more of the carved doorway Miriam had discovered the previous evening. The sun climbed higher, beating down mercilessly, but neither Duvall woman seemed to notice. Each uncovered symbol, each cleared stone, fed their growing excitement. By midday, they had exposed a set of steps leading downward, vanishing beneath packed earth and fallen debris. Miriam sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her brow. It's real, she whispered. All these years, people thought he was chasing shadows. Leora grinned, her face dirt-streaked but alight with discovery. They're going to have to apologize to us, all those people who laughed. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Miriam cautioned, but couldn't keep the smile from her voice. We don't know what's down there yet. Only one way to find out. Leora was already reaching for a shovel. They had cleared perhaps 4 feet of the stairway when a shadow fell across their work. Miriam looked up, shielding her eyes against the sun, to find Father Alaric Byrne standing at the edge of their excavation. His tall, gaunt frame was silhouetted against the sky, his clerical collar startlingly white against his black clothing. "Mrs. Duvall," he said, his voice carrying the weight of his office. "I heard in town you'd purchased this land." Miriam stood, suddenly conscious of how disheveled she must appear. "Father Byrne, I didn't expect visitors out here." "Few venture to the Dead Fields willingly," he agreed, his gaze moving to the exposed stairway. "Though it appears you found something to justify your investment." There was no mockery in his tone, but Miriam sensed disapproval nonetheless. Father Byrne had been kind after her husband's death, but his piety ran deep and sometimes rigid. "We've discovered what appears to be an entrance to some underground structure," she said carefully. "Perhaps an old storage cellar or mine. Or perhaps something best left buried," Father Byrne replied. He descended into the excavation with surprising agility for a man his age. Crouching beside the steps, he traced one finger along the carved symbols, his expression troubled. "These are not of God's church, nor of any Christian settlement." Leora, never one for tact, blurted, "They're older. Grandfather thought they might predate the missions by centuries." Father Byrne's eyes narrowed. Edmund Duvall had many unconventional theories. Some might call them dangerous. He stood, brushing dust from his hands. "The church teaches us that pride comes before a fall, Mrs. Duvall. The desire to know what God has hidden has led many astray." "With respect, Father," Miriam said, "we've merely uncovered an old doorway. Nothing heretical in that, perhaps." His gaze lingered on the stairway. "But I would caution you against disturbing what lies beyond. Some grounds are cursed for a reason." He turned to leave, then paused. "The desert preserves many things, Mrs. Duvall. Not all of them are meant to be found again." They watched him go, his black-clad figure receding across the barren landscape. "Well, that was ominous," Leora muttered. Miriam said nothing but felt a chill despite the heat. Father Byrne was not a superstitious man. His warnings came from genuine concern. Misguided though it might be, they returned to their work with renewed determination, clearing more of the stairway until it descended into darkness beyond the reach of daylight. By late afternoon, they had exposed a stone archway, its surface covered in the same flowing script. "We'll need the lanterns," Miriam said, reaching for her pack. "And we should be careful. These steps are ancient." Leora was practically vibrating with excitement. "Do you think there are chambers down there, like Egyptian tombs?" "I think," Miriam said, lighting the first lantern, "that we're about to find out what your grandfather spent half his life searching for." She lifted the light, illuminating the descending stairway. "Stay close to me." As they prepared to descend, Miriam couldn't shake the feeling that the stones around them had begun to whisper. The air changed the moment they passed beneath the archway. Cooler, certainly, but also different in a way Miriam couldn't name. Ancient, perhaps undisturbed, the steps descended at a gentle slope, each one carved with precision that had withstood centuries of burial. Their lanterns cast jumping shadows against walls lined with more of the flowing script, interspersed with images of figures in procession, carrying objects Miriam didn't recognize. "Look at their clothing," Leora whispered. Her voice instinctively hushed in the stillness. "Nothing like the native tribes. And these buildings in the background, they're massive with domes and spires." Miriam nodded, her free hand trailing along the wall carvings. "A civilization no one's documented. At least no one who shared their findings." She thought of her father, of the nights he'd spent poring over his journals, connecting fragments of stories and rumors that most scholars dismissed. The stairway ended abruptly in a vast chamber that stole Miriam's breath. Their lanterns couldn't illuminate its full extent, but what they revealed was enough to make her knees weak. Columns carved to resemble twisting vines supported a ceiling lost in darkness. The floor was a mosaic of colored stone, depicting celestial patterns, stars, comets, phases of the moon, and everywhere burial niches. "It's a necropolis," Miriam breathed. "A city of the dead." Hundreds, perhaps thousands of recessed chambers lined the walls, each sealed with stone slabs bearing the same flowing script. Some had been broken open. By time or human hands, it was impossible to tell, revealing glimpses of their contents. Leora moved toward the nearest open niche, holding her lantern high. "Mother, look!" Inside lay what had once been a body, now reduced to dust and fragments. But surrounding it, gleaming in the lantern light, were objects that defied explanation. A mask of hammered gold, its features serene and alien. Vessels of crystal containing powders that still held vibrant color. Jewelry fashioned from metals and gems that caught the light in ways that seemed almost alive. They buried their dead with treasure, Leora whispered. Awestruck, with knowledge, Miriam corrected, gesturing to scrolls and tablets, carefully arranged around the remains. "Look, they're positioned as if for the deceased to read in the afterlife." They moved deeper into the chamber, discoveries multiplying with each step. Inscriptions covered every available surface, telling stories neither Duvall could yet decipher. Miriam's mind raced with possibilities. This find could rewrite the region's history, or challenge everything scholars thought they knew about pre-Columbian civilizations. "We need to document everything," she said, retrieving her journal. "Drawings, rubbings of the text. We'll need to translate." A sound stopped her, the faint shift of stone against stone somewhere in the darkness beyond their lanterns. "What was that?" Leora asked, her excitement giving way to unease. Miriam raised her lantern higher, peering into the shadows. "Probably just settling. These structures have been buried for centuries." Another sound, this one more deliberate. A footstep, perhaps, or something being moved. "We're not alone down here," Leora whispered. Miriam felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground air. "Stay close to me," she said, moving back toward the entrance. "We should return to town, bring proper equipment. But the scrolls will still be here tomorrow." Miriam's voice left no room for argument. "This place has waited centuries to be found. It can wait one more day." They retraced their steps with greater haste than they'd descended, both straining to hear any further sounds from the darkness behind them. Miriam's mind raced. Had someone followed them? Father Byrne, perhaps concerned for their souls? Or someone with more practical interest in the necropolis's contents? Daylight had never looked so welcome as when they emerged from the stairway. Miriam took a deep breath of hot, dusty air, mentally cataloguing what they would need for a proper exploration. Better lights, tools for careful extraction, materials for documenting their finds. "Mrs. Duvall," a voice called. Smooth as silk and just as insincere. What a coincidence! Ezekiel Voss sat atop a handsome bay horse at the edge of their excavation, his expression one of practiced surprise. Behind him, two men Miriam recognized as his business associates waited on horseback, their posture suggesting they hadn't come for a social call. "Mr. Voss," Miriam replied, struggling to keep her voice even. "This is private property." "Indeed it is," he agreed, dismounting with fluid grace. "Property which has suddenly become quite interesting, I must say." His gaze moved deliberately to the stairway, then back to Miriam's dirt-stained clothing. "I believe we should discuss your discovery, Mrs. Duvall. I'm prepared to be quite generous." Leora stepped closer to her mother, chin raised defiantly. "It's not for sale." Voss smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Everything has its price, Miss Duvall. Your mother paid $7 for this land." He gestured expansively. "I'm prepared to offer $700. A fair return on investment, wouldn't you agree?" Miriam met his gaze steadily. "As my daughter said, Mr. Voss, it's not for sale." Something cold flickered behind Voss's pleasant expression. "I admire your spirit, Mrs. Duvall, but I fear you may find this discovery beyond your means to manage properly." He glanced meaningfully at the two men behind him. "There are many interested parties in our community. Not all will approach you with an honest offer." The threat, thinly veiled as it was, hung in the air between them. Thank you for your concern, Miriam said, gathering her tools. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have preparations to make. As they walked past Voss and his men, Leora whispered, "What do we do now?" Miriam clutched her satchel tighter, feeling the weight of her father's journal within. "We protect what we've found," she murmured. "Whatever it takes." Behind them, Voss watched their departure, his calculating gaze never leaving the entrance to the Necropolis, the doorway to secrets that had lain hidden for centuries, now exposed to the light of day and the darkness of human greed. Miriam's small house at the edge of town had never felt so vulnerable. 2 days had passed since their first venture into the Necropolis, and word had spread through Grayrock like wildfire. She'd spent those days carefully transcribing what they'd found, copying symbols into her journal, while Leora sketched the burial chambers and artifacts with remarkable precision. The knock at her door came as dusk settled over the valley. 3 sharp raps, confident, demanding attention. "I'll get it," Leora said, setting aside her charcoal drawing. "No." Miriam wiped ink-stained fingers on her apron. "Stay here." She opened the door to find Ezekiel Voss on her porch, immaculate in a tailored suit, despite the dusty evening. Behind him waited a carriage, its driver staring impassively ahead. "Mrs. Duvall," Voss said, removing his hat. "I trust I find you well this evening?" "Mr. Voss," Miriam acknowledged, not inviting him in. If he noticed the slight, he ignored it. "I've come to continue our discussion about your property. May I?" He gestured toward the interior of her home. Reluctantly, Miriam stepped aside. She had no illusions about refusing him. Voss controlled half the businesses in town and held mortgages on most of the rest. His influence extended from the mayor's office to the county judge. Voss entered, scanning the humble living room with practiced disinterest, before his gaze landed on the table covered with Leora's drawings and Miriam's notes. "Quite the scholarly undertaking," he observed. Moving toward the papers, Miriam stepped between him and the table. "What can I do for you this evening, Mr. Voss?" He smiled thinly. "Direct as always." "Very well." He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope heavy with contents. $3,000, Mrs. Duvall, for your land and all claims to what lies beneath it." Miriam couldn't help the sharp intake of breath. It was more money than she'd see in 10 years of teaching. "That's a considerable sum," she managed. "A fair price for what you've discovered," Voss replied smoothly. "Enough to secure Leora's education at any women's college back east. Enough to move somewhere more. Accommodating to a widow of your sensibilities." From the corner, Leora made a small sound of indignation. Voss glanced at her, his smile widening a fraction. "Think of your daughter's future, Mrs. Duvall. Those ruins have lain undisturbed for centuries. Do you truly believe they're meant for a schoolteacher to decipher?" Miriam studied him, noting the tension beneath his polished exterior. Voss wanted the Necropolis badly, but why? Not for its historical value. The man had never shown interest in the past, except where profit could be extracted. "The ruins are a significant historical discovery," she said carefully. "They belong to history, not to private ownership." Voss's smile faded. "Mrs. Duvall, I admire your principles, but you're being naive. The moment news of gold artifacts spreads beyond our little town, and it will, you'll have more company at your excavation than you can possibly manage." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Voss?" "Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." He sighed, a study in reasonable disappointment. "I'm warning you, there are men who wouldn't bother with offers, men who would simply take what they want." He returned the envelope to his jacket. "I'm offering you protection as much as compensation." "I'll take my chances," Miriam said, her voice firmer than she felt. Voss studied her for a moment, then nodded as if he'd confirmed something. "As you wish. But my offer has an expiration, Mrs. Duvall. The world is full of treasures waiting to be claimed. Your necropolis is merely one of many." He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. "One last piece of advice, freely given. Whatever you found down there, whatever secrets you think it holds, some things remain buried for good reasons. Not all treasure improves the finder's fortune. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that somehow felt more threatening than a slam. Leora emerged from the corner, her expression a mixture of relief and defiance. "You didn't sell," she said. "Of course not." Miriam moved to the window, watching Voss's carriage pull away. "But he's right about one thing. Once word spreads, we won't be the only ones interested in the Necropolis. So what do we do?" Miriam turned from the window, resolution hardening within her. "We work faster. Document everything we can before others arrive. If the Necropolis contains knowledge, we need to preserve it before men like Voss can plunder it for gold alone." That night, as Miriam lay in bed, her father's journal opened beside her. She heard it, footsteps circling the house, pausing beneath windows, testing latches. She lay perfectly still, listening as they completed a full circuit before fading into the darkness. A warning, delivered without words. Voss was not a man accustomed to denial. Sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of endless corridors beneath the earth, and the sensation of ancient eyes watching her progress through them. They returned to the Necropolis at dawn, determined to make progress before prying eyes could follow. The desert sunrise painted the ruins in gold and shadow as Miriam and Leora made their way down the now familiar stairway, better equipped this time with stronger lanterns and tools for careful excavation. The main chamber looked different in their improved light, larger, more intricate in its construction. Miriam marveled at the engineering that had created such a space underground, the precision of stonework that had withstood centuries without collapse. "We should focus on the inscriptions near the central altar," she said, indicating the raised platform they'd noticed during their first exploration. "If there's any explanation of this place's purpose, it would be there." They worked methodically, Miriam copying text while Leora sketched the layout, both referring constantly to the symbols catalogued in Miriam Duvall's journal. Hours passed in scholarly concentration, broken only when a shadow fell across the chamber entrance. "Impressive construction," said a man's voice, deep and rough-edged. Cobblered arch supporting a weight-dispersing ceiling. These people knew their stonework. Miriam spun, lantern raised. A man stood silhouetted against the stairway light, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dust-covered traveling clothes. A battered hat sat low over eyes that glinted with intelligence and something else, calculation. "Perhaps, or greed. This is private property," Miriam said, her voice steadier than she felt. The man chuckled, stepping further into the chamber. "So I've heard. Name's Jonah Coyle. I've some experience with places like this." "You're trespassing, Mr. Coyle," he shrugged, seemingly unconcerned. "Trespassing's a matter of perspective. These builders might consider us all trespassers." His gaze swept the chamber with the practiced assessment of someone who had seen similar spaces before. "They've laid traps, you know. All these old burial sites do." Leora, unable to contain her curiosity despite her mother's warning glare, asked, "What kind of traps?" Coyle grinned, revealing a chipped front tooth that lent him a roguish air. "Pressure plates that trigger deadfalls, counterweights that flood chambers when disturbed. Some ingenious, some brutally simple." He pointed toward a corridor leading deeper into the Necropolis. "That passage there, for instance. See how the floor tiles have that slight discoloration every seventh plate? Classic pressure triggers." Miriam felt a chill. They'd been about to explore that very corridor. "How would you know that?" she demanded. 20 years opening tombs from Mexico to Egypt," he replied without apology. "I know death architecture better than most people know their own homes." He removed his hat, revealing sun-weathered features and eyes that had seen more than they should. "I could help you navigate this place. Keep you and the girl from ending up permanent residents." Miriam's eyes narrowed. "Out of the goodness of your heart?" Coyle laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the burial chamber. "Not hardly. I've never done anything from goodness." He gestured around the chamber. "But places like this, they deserve respect." "Professional handling. You're a grave robber," Miriam stated flatly. "Treasure hunter," he corrected. "Though lately I've developed a scholarly interest." Funny how age does that to a man. Mother, Leora whispered, he knows about the traps. We could use— No, Miriam cut her off. Mr. Coyle was just leaving. Weren't you, Mr. Coyle? Instead of leaving, he took another step into the chamber. Voss sent me, he admitted. Offered good money to bring him artifacts. Said you wouldn't cooperate. And now you've seen the place, you mean to rob it for him. Coyle shook his head. I meant to. Then I saw this. He gestured toward the necropolis with something approaching reverence. This isn't some native burial ground or Spanish treasure cache. This is— He struggled for words. This is something else entirely. Something important. Why should I believe you? Because I'm warning you, instead of knocking you both unconscious and taking what I want, he said bluntly. Voss isn't the only one with his eye on this place. Word's spreading. There are men coming who don't share my evolving ethical standards. Miriam studied him, trying to separate truth from manipulation. What do you propose? A partnership, Coyle said. I help you document and navigate safely. You let me study the place alongside you. Whatever we find together. And the treasures? Miriam asked. The gold and gems? Coyle shrugged. I won't pretend they don't interest me, but they're not why I'm here. His expression grew serious. I've opened enough tombs to know when something's different. This place, it wasn't built just to honor the dead. It was built to preserve something. Knowledge, maybe? Leora tugged at her mother's sleeve. He could help us, she whispered. And if he's with us, he's not helping Voss. Miriam wasn't convinced, but practicality overrode suspicion. Better to keep this treasure hunter where she could watch him than have him working against her in the shadows. You may accompany us, she said finally, but you follow my lead. This is still my property, Mr. Coyle. He grinned, replacing his hat. Call me Jonah, and you won't regret this. Mrs. Duvall, there's more to these old places than gold and bones. There's stories waiting to be told. As if to punctuate his words, a faint rumble echoed from deep within the necropolis, stone shifting against stone in chambers they had yet to explore. 3 days later, Miriam sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by rubbings of inscriptions, struggling to find patterns among the flowing symbols. Jonah had proven useful, if not entirely trustworthy, showing them how to safely navigate deeper into the necropolis while avoiding the subtle traps the builders had left for grave robbers. Leora had taken to him immediately, captivated by his tales of ancient sites from across the world. This sequence appears repeatedly, Miriam muttered, comparing 2 different rubbings. Almost like a formula or invocation. Any progress? Leora asked, entering with freshly baked bread. Miriam sighed, pushing back from the table. Some. These symbols match fragments from your grandfather's journal, but without context. A knock at the door interrupted her, soft, almost hesitant, unlike Voss's commanding rap. Leora moved to answer it, while Miriam hastily covered the most revealing documents. May I help you? Leora's voice carried from the entryway. I seek Miriam Duvall, replied an elderly voice, thin but clear. I believe she has found something of great significance. Miriam joined her daughter at the door to find a slight figure in travel-worn monk's robes. His face, deeply lined and framed by wispy white hair, held eyes of startling clarity, pale blue, alert despite his apparent age. I am Miriam Duvall, she said cautiously. The old man bowed slightly. Brother Matthias Hale, of St. Cyril's Monastery in the North Country. May I enter? I have journeyed far to speak with you. Something about his direct gaze made Miriam step aside. How do you know me? Brother Matthias moved to the table with the careful gait of one whose bones ached with each step. Not you specifically, he said. But what you have found. Your travels, Mrs. Duvall, especially when it concerns matters long watched. He gestured toward her covered documents. May I? Before Miriam could object, he had lifted one of the rubbings, his fingers tracing the symbols with the familiarity of recognition. You can read this? Miriam asked, astonished. Not fully, the monk admitted. But fragments, yes. My order has preserved certain texts the wider church deemed problematic. Heretical, you mean, Leora said, earning a sharp look from her mother. Brother Matthias smiled faintly. Heterodox, perhaps. Our founder believed all knowledge deserved preservation, even that which challenged comfortable certainties. He tapped the rubbing. These symbols describe a place of safekeeping, a repository for wisdom too dangerous for the greedy or the simple. What wisdom? Miriam asked, her academic interest fully engaged now. The old monk's gaze grew distant. The texts speak of a civilization that rose and fell before recorded history, one that understood principles of nature we have only begun to rediscover. They foresaw their end and created repositories for their knowledge, hidden from those who might misuse it. He withdrew a small leather pouch from within his robes, carefully extracting a fragile parchment. This fragment was copied from an original text nearly 8 centuries ago by monks of my order. Miriam leaned closer, her breath catching. The parchment bore symbols identical to those in the Necropolis, alongside Latin annotations. How did you come by this? She whispered. My order has collected such fragments for generations, Brother Matthias said. Most dismissed them as fantasy or metaphor, but your father did not. Miriam's head snapped up. You knew my father? The monk nodded, a hint of sadness in his eyes. Edmund Duvall visited our monastery many times. He was one of few scholars who took our collection seriously. He believed the texts referred to actual places, repositories like your Necropolis. Why didn't he find it himself? Leora asked. If he knew what to look for? Time and resources failed him, Brother Matthias sighed. And perhaps some measure of courage. To truly seek such places is to challenge history itself, a heavy burden. Miriam's mind raced with implications. These symbols here, she said, pointing to a sequence on both her rubbing and his parchment. They appear throughout the Necropolis. What do they mean? They are a warning and a promise, the monk replied. Knowledge sleeps with the guardians, awaiting those worthy to awaken it, the guardians being the dead themselves. The conversation might have continued, but the door burst open without warning. Father Alaric Burns stood in the entrance, his tall frame rigid with indignation. Brother Matthias, he said, his voice like winter frost. The abbot of St. Cyril's informed me you had left without permission. Now I find you here, spreading your order's dangerous fantasies. The old monk rose slowly to his feet, facing the priest without apparent concern. Father Byrne, still confusing faith with fear, I see. It is not fear to protect people from falsehoods, Father Alaric replied. His gaze fell on the parchment and rubbings. What poison are you feeding these women? Truth, Brother Matthias said simply. A commodity your tradition has always found difficult to digest when it comes from unexpected sources. Alaric's face flushed. You dare lecture me on tradition? Your order has been under observation for heretical texts for decades, and yet we persist, the monk replied with the faintest smile. Perhaps because not all within the church share your narrow vision. Miriam stepped between them. Father Alaric, Brother Matthias is my guest. He's helping us understand historical documents. Documents that contradict established history, Alaric said sharply. Mrs. Duvall, I warned you about disturbing cursed ground. Now I find you consorting with a known collector of forbidden texts. There is nothing forbidden about knowledge, Miriam countered, her patience wearing thin. The Necropolis exists. Its artifacts are real. If they challenge what we thought we knew, then perhaps our knowledge was incomplete. Father Alaric's gaze moved from Miriam to Leora to the old monk. The church has managed the spiritual welfare of this community for generations. Introducing pagan artifacts and heretical texts threatens that stability. Truth often does, Brother Matthias murmured. You will leave my parish, Alaric said to the monk. And you, Mrs. Duvall, would be wise to reconsider your excavation before it draws unwanted attention from diocesan authorities. With that, he turned and left, his black cassock billowing behind him. Brother Matthias sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every year of his advanced age. I apologize for bringing trouble to your door, Mrs. Duvall. You brought knowledge, Miriam replied. That outweighs any trouble Father Alaric might cause. The old monk nodded gratefully. We should work quickly then. If the church takes official interest in your necropolis, access could become complicated. First, Miriam said, pulling out her father's journal, tell me everything you know about what my father was seeking, and why he never told me about your monastery. Brother Matthias's pale eyes held a curious mixture of sorrow and hope. Some secrets are passed on only when the bearer believes the recipient is ready to carry their weight. Perhaps he meant to tell you, but time, as it so often does, ran out before he could. Outside, the desert wind picked up, sending dust devils spinning across the dead fields where ancient secrets waited in the dark. Their time of revelation drawing near, for good or ill. Darkness had fully claimed the necropolis when the intruders arrived. The moon hung thin as a nail paring above the dead fields, providing just enough light for the 5 men to find the excavated entrance. They moved with the caution of those unaccustomed to stealth, all except their leader, who navigated the darkness with practiced ease. Remember, Jonah Coyle whispered to the men Voss had hired, touch nothing without my say-so. This place is older than Christianity and twice as vengeful to trespassers. One of the men, a burly blacksmith named Harker, spat into the dust. Just get us to the gold, Coyle. Voss ain't paying for superstition. Jonah's expression hardened in the moonlight. Voss isn't down here with you. I am. And I've buried enough men who didn't listen in places like this. Lanterns flared as they descended the ancient stairs, casting grotesque shadows against walls lined with warning symbols none of them could read. None except Jonah, who had spent the past week learning enough from Miriam's research to recognize the most critical inscriptions. Knowledge sleeps with the guardians, awaiting those worthy to awaken it. Worthy. The word had lodged in Jonah's mind like a splinter. 20 years of tomb robbing had never concerned itself with worthiness, only profit. Yet something about this place, about Miriam Duvall's stubborn integrity, had awakened an unfamiliar discomfort within him. This way, he said, leading them into the main chamber they'd already mapped. The artifacts Voss described will be in the eastern passages. It was a deliberate misdirection. The most valuable treasures, both material and scholarly, lay in the opposite direction, where Miriam had focused her most recent work. Jonah had his own arrangements with Voss, and they didn't include giving the man everything. Spread out. Harker ordered the others. Grab anything that shines. Stay together, Jonah countered sharply, or you'll never see daylight again. The men hesitated, caught between commands. Jonah used their uncertainty to press his advantage. This place is rigged with deadfalls and flood chambers. You want to live to spend Voss's money? Stay close and touch nothing I don't approve. Reluctantly, they followed him toward the eastern corridors, dark, narrow passages lined with lesser burial niches. Jonah's lantern illuminated dusty offerings, pottery, small jade carvings, copper ornaments valuable to archaeologists, but disappointing to treasure hunters. This is worthless junk, Harker growled after 20 minutes of careful exploration. Voss said there was gold. Deeper in, Jonah replied, buying time. He needed to keep them occupied until his real plan could unfold. The richest burials are always the most protected. A sound froze them all, faint but unmistakable. Footsteps, coming from the main chamber. Someone else is here, whispered one of the men, a ranch hand named Cutler. Jonah silently cursed. It was too early. The arrangement had been clear. Stay here, he ordered, handing his lantern to Harker. I'll check. He moved silently back through the passage, years of experience guiding his steps in near darkness. As he approached the main chamber, voices became distinct, familiar voices that sent a jolt of alarm through him. This inscription differs from the others, came Brother Matthias's reedy voice. See how the forms curve inward? I believe it marks a ceremonial space, or a warning, replied Miriam Duvall. A third voice, younger and bright with excitement. Leora. Mother, look what I found behind this panel. Jonah stepped into the chamber's edge, remaining in shadow. The Duvall women and the old monk had returned for a night expedition, carrying better lanterns than any previous visit. Their light revealed Leora kneeling before a wall section that had been rotated open like a door, exposing a narrow passage beyond. "Careful," Miriam cautioned. Jonah warned about traps in the unexplored sections. The irony might have made Jonah smile under different circumstances. Now it only sharpened his dilemma. Behind him, Voss's men grew impatient in the darkness. Ahead, Miriam and her daughter ventured toward dangers they couldn't possibly understand. His decision was made for him when Harker's heavy tread sounded directly behind him. "Found our competition."
"Coil?"
the blacksmith rumbled, raising his lantern high to flood the chamber with light. 3 startled faces turned toward them, surprise, then recognition, then betrayal crossing Miriam's features as she saw Jonah standing with Voss's men. "Mr. Coil," she said, her voice flat. "I see you've brought friends, Mrs. Duvall," he replied, struggling to convey a warning he couldn't speak aloud. "This is unexpected, is it?" Her eyes were cold. "I had begun to think better of you." "My mistake." Harker pushed past Jonah, the other men following. "Enough talk. Voss wants everything valuable collected tonight." He pointed at Leora's discovery. "What's down there, girl?" "None of your concern," Miriam said, stepping in front of her daughter. Harker laughed. "Everything here is our concern now, lady." He turned to his companions. "Search them." "Then we check that passage." "No." Jonah moved forward, casting desperate glances at the floor tiles near the newly discovered opening. "That section hasn't been secured. Let me check for trying to keep the best finds for yourself." Harker sneered. "I don't think so." He shoved Jonah aside and strode toward Leora, who stood defiantly beside the opening. "Don't move!" Jonah shouted, but too late. Harker's boot came down on a floor tile that depressed with an audible click. For one suspended moment, nothing happened. Then a grinding sound filled the chamber, ancient gears and counterweights awakening after centuries of silence. "Run!" Jonah lunged forward, grabbing Leora's arm and pulling her away from the wall just as the ceiling above her began to crack. Stone blocks, each weighing hundreds of pounds, crashed down where she had stood moments before. The chamber shook with the impact. Dust billowed upward, choking the air as more grinding sounds echoed from deep within the necropolis. The trap, once triggered, had awakened others. "Get out!" Jonah shouted to the men, who needed no further encouragement. They fled toward the entrance stairway, abandoning lanterns in their panic. Miriam clutched her daughter close, eyes wide with fear and confusion. "What have you done?" "Saved her life," Jonah replied grimly. "And now I need to save all of yours." This entire section is coming down. As if confirming his words, another block crashed from the ceiling, narrowly missing Brother Matthias. "This way," the old monk said with unexpected authority, pointing toward the passage Leora had discovered. "The inner chambers will be more secure, built to withstand collapse." "How could you know that?" Miriam demanded. "The texts," Matthias replied. They spoke of a sanctuary at the Necropolis core, protected by the very traps meant to keep intruders out. More blocks fell. The decision was made for them as the path to the entrance became blocked with rubble. "Go!" Jonah urged, supporting the monk with one arm while gesturing them forward. "I'll be right behind you." Miriam hesitated only a moment before leading Leora into the narrow passage. Jonah and Brother Matthias followed, the sounds of destruction fading behind them as they ventured deeper than any of them had gone before. The passage opened into a chamber unlike any they'd yet seen. Perfectly circular, with a domed ceiling intact despite the destruction behind them, it held no burial niches or treasure hoards. Instead, its walls were covered with intricate carvings, maps, diagrams, and dense text that flowed in mesmerizing patterns. "The sanctuary," Brother Matthias breathed, his eyes wide with wonder. "Just as the text described," Miriam turned to Jonah, her expression a storm of confusion and anger. "You led Voss's men here. After everything we shared with you." "I led them away from this," he countered, gesturing to the chamber. "I've been feeding Voss false reports all week, while helping you map the real discoveries." He ran a hand through dust-caked hair. Tonight was supposed to be a controlled theft, enough minor artifacts to satisfy him temporarily. While you claimed the real treasures? She demanded. While I bought time for you to document what matters, Jonah said, meeting her gaze squarely. This place, it's not about gold or gems. It's about what's written here. He turned toward the carved walls. Knowledge that could change how we understand history itself. Leora, who had been examining the carvings, spoke up. Mother, look at this section. It matches the fragments in Grandfather's journal, the ones he could never place in context. Miriam joined her daughter, scholar's instinct overcoming her anger at Jonah. You're right. These are stellar charts, but like none I've ever seen. Her fingers traced the carvings. And these numerical systems, they're advanced beyond anything attributed to this continent's ancient peoples. The sanctuary was their greatest achievement, Brother Matthias said, his voice reverent, the sum of their knowledge, preserved for those who would come after the fall of their civilization. We need to document everything, Miriam said, her academic passion reigniting. If we can translate these inscriptions, a distant rumble interrupted her, followed by voices echoing from the blocked passage, angry voices giving orders. Voss, Jonah said grimly. He must have met his men fleeing and decided to take matters into his own hands. Can they reach us? Leora asked, fear edging her voice. Eventually, Jonah replied. Men with picks and determination can breach most barriers. Miriam straightened, decision crystallizing in her eyes. Then we have work to do before they arrive. 3 days later, Miriam stood before a hastily convened town meeting in Grayrock's modest church hall. After escaping the necropolis through a secondary passage Brother Matthias had identified, they had returned to find the town in an uproar. Father Alaric, having heard of the night expedition and subsequent cave-in, had called for an emergency assembly to address what he termed the Duvall menace. Now Miriam faced her neighbors, farmers, shopkeepers and laborers she'd known for years, transformed into an impromptu tribunal by fear and suspicion. Father Alaric stood on the small stage beside Mayor Tullinger, his severe black cassock a stark contrast to the mayor's nervous demeanor. Citizens of Grayrock, Father Alaric began, his resonant voice filling the hall. We face a threat to our community's spiritual and physical well-being. Mrs. Duvall has unearthed pagan ruins of disturbing character and brought dangerous outsiders into our midst. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Many avoided Miriam's gaze, while others watched with undisguised hostility. Her reckless excavations have already resulted in injury to respected members of our community, Alaric continued. Mr. Harker remains bedridden with injuries sustained when ancient traps were triggered. Traps triggered by thieves, Miriam called out, refusing to be silenced. Men sent by Councilman Voss to plunder a historical site. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Ezekiel Voss, seated in the front row, rose smoothly to his feet. Mrs. Duvall, he said, his voice pitched for perfect reasonableness, no one disputes your legal ownership of the land. What concerns us is whether you can manage such a dangerous discovery responsibly. He turned to address the assembly. 3 men injured. Ancient mechanisms awakened without warning. Who knows what diseases or curses might emerge from a tomb sealed for centuries? It's not a tomb, Miriam countered. It's a repository of knowledge. A library of a forgotten civilization. A civilization that practiced pagan burial rites, Father Alaric interjected. That entombed their dead with ungodly artifacts and inscriptions that contradict the known history of God's creation. From the back of the hall, Brother Matthias's voice rose clearly. The only thing contradicted, Father, is your limited understanding of that history. The old monk made his way forward, his frail appearance belied by the strength of his presence. Whispers followed him. Many in town had heard rumors of the strange monk who challenged Father Alaric's authority. The necropolis contains no evil, Matthias continued. It contains knowledge, astronomy, mathematics, medicine, preserved by a people who saw their end approaching and wished to safeguard their achievements. achievements that include death traps and graven images. Alaric demanded. Protections for their legacy, Matthias replied calmly. As for images, does not your own church feature statues and paintings of saints? Mayor Tullinger cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps we should focus on practical matters. Mrs. Duvall, this discovery has brought strangers and danger to our community. The council believes the site should be sealed and placed under town supervision until proper authorities can be consulted. You mean until Voss can strip it of valuables? Miriam said flatly. Voss spread his hands in apparent innocence. I've offered fair compensation for your land. Mrs. Duvall, my only concern is the safety of our town. Liar, came a young voice from the side door. Leora Duvall entered, carrying a large sheet of parchment covered with careful drawings and notes. Jonah Coyle followed, his tall frame drawing suspicious glances from the crowd. Leora, Miriam warned, but her daughter paid no heed. I've been translating the inscriptions, Leora announced, approaching the front of the hall. With Brother Matthias's help and my grandfather's notes, they tell the story of the people who built the Necropolis. She unfolded her parchment on a table, revealing meticulous copies of symbols alongside their translations. They called themselves the Keepers of Dawn, she continued, her voice growing stronger as she warmed to her subject. They weren't from this continent originally. They came from across the Eastern Ocean nearly 4,000 years ago, fleeing wars that destroyed their homeland. A ripple of disbelief ran through the crowd. Father Alaric scoffed openly. Preposterous. No such migration is recorded in any historical text, because history was written by those who came later, Leora replied without hesitation. The keepers lived here for centuries before declining. When they knew their civilization was ending, they created repositories like our Necropolis to preserve their knowledge. She pointed to a section of her translations. They write of astronomical cycles, of medicines drawn from plants we've forgotten, of building techniques that allowed them to create earthquake-resistant structures. This isn't evil, it's a gift they left for future generations. The crowd's mood had shifted, skepticism giving way to curiosity. Miriam felt a surge of pride at her daughter's passionate articulation. Fantasy and fabrication, Father Alaric declared, designed to justify disturbing sacred ground. Not fantasy, came Jonah Coyle's rough voice. He stepped forward, commanding attention through sheer presence. I've opened tombs from Egypt to Peru, seen the burial chambers of a dozen civilizations. This necropolis is unlike any of them, built not to glorify the dead, but to preserve wisdom. And who might you be? Mayor Tullinger asked, frowning. Someone who's seen enough plunder to recognize its opposite, Jonah replied. The Duvall women aren't treasure hunters, they're scholars. They deserve the chance to document what they found before men like Voss destroy it for profit. Voss rose again, his composure slipping slightly. Bold accusations from a known grave robber. Yes, he added as murmurs swept the crowd. I've made inquiries about Mr. Coyle here. His reputation precedes him across several borders. Hardly a character witness Mrs. Duvall should rely upon. I trust his expertise, Miriam said firmly, moving to stand beside Jonah. And I trust the evidence before my eyes. The necropolis contains historical treasures far more valuable than gold or gems. Knowledge that belongs to humanity's shared heritage, not to private interests. She faced the assembly squarely. I purchased that land fairly. What lies beneath it is my responsibility. I intend to protect it, document it properly, and ensure its contents are preserved for scholars to study, not looted for quick profit or buried out of fear. The town had divided before her eyes, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads in disapproval or confusion. Mayor Tullinger looked desperately between Father Alaric and the increasingly sympathetic crowd. Perhaps, the mayor suggested hesitantly, a compromise might be reached. A committee to oversee the excavation, representatives of the church, the council, and Mrs. Duvall working together. Unacceptable, Father Alaric snapped. The site should be sealed immediately. Equally unacceptable, Voss countered smoothly. The town's interests must be protected through direct council oversight. Miriam met their opposition with calm resolve. The land is mine. The discovery is mine. I will continue my work with or without your blessing. As the assembly dissolved into heated arguments, Miriam gathered her small group, Leora, Jonah, and Brother Matthias, and led them toward the exit. They won't stop with words, Jonah warned quietly. Voss wants what's down there too badly. Then we need to be ready, Miriam replied. The Necropolis has protected its secrets for thousands of years. With our help, it can do so a while longer. Dawn broke pink and gold over the dead fields, revealing a procession approaching from town. A dozen men on horseback and more on foot, led by Ezekiel Voss himself. The councilman sat straight-backed on his bay gelding, a rifle resting across his saddle. From the entrance to the Necropolis, Miriam watched their approach through a brass spyglass that had been her husband's. 15 armed men at least, she reported grimly. Voss isn't bothering with legal pretenses anymore. Beside her, Jonah Coyle checked the revolver he'd retrieved from his saddlebags the previous night. Mayor's with them too, he noted. Giving this mess an official stamp, Miriam lowered the spyglass. We knew this was coming after the meeting collapsed yesterday. She turned to where Leora and Brother Matthias waited just inside the Necropolis entrance. Are the preparations complete? Leora nodded, her young face solemn but determined. The inner sanctuary is secured. All our documentation and the most important artifacts are hidden there. And the other matter, Miriam pressed. Done as you asked, Brother Matthias confirmed. Though I pray it won't be necessary, Jonah gave a humorless laugh. Hoping Voss and his men will see reason and turn back? I've known the man 3 weeks, and even I recognize the futility of that prayer. The approaching party halted 100 yards from the excavation. Voss raised a hand in greeting that might have seemed friendly if not for the armed men surrounding him. Mrs. Duvall, he called, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. One final opportunity to be reasonable. The town council has authorized me to offer you $5,000 for your land and all claims to what it contains. A generous appraisal for worthless desert, Miriam called back. What changed your assessment, Mr. Voss? Even at this distance, she could see his smile tighten. Civic responsibility, Mrs. Duvall. The council believes the ruins should be properly managed by town authorities. You mean stripped of valuables and then destroyed, she countered. My answer remains no, Voss sighed theatrically. As you wish. He turned to the men behind him. Mayor Tullinger has issued a warrant for the arrest of Miriam Duvall on charges of reckless endangerment and harboring fugitives. We are authorized to take her into custody and secure the dangerous ruins. That's a legal fiction and you know it, Jonah shouted back. Tullinger has no authority to issue such a warrant. Nevertheless, Voss replied, we intend to execute it. He signaled to his men. Advance! The horsemen moved forward at a walk, rifles ready. Behind them, the men on foot spread into a line, carrying picks, shovels, and the occasional revolver. Inside, Miriam ordered her companions. We can't stop them by force. They retreated into the Necropolis, securing the makeshift door they'd constructed from timbers and canvas. It wouldn't stop determined men for long, but it wasn't meant to. To the inner chambers, Miriam directed. Quickly, they hurried through passages now familiar after weeks of exploration, navigating by lantern light toward the sanctuary they'd discovered during the cave-in. Behind them, they heard the muffled thuds of Voss's men attacking their barricade. Will this work? Leora asked, her voice tight with fear and excitement. If Brother Matthias translated the inscriptions correctly, Miriam replied. And if the mechanisms still function after all these centuries, the old monk smiled faintly. Faith, Mrs. Duvall. Not in my translations, but in the ingenuity of those who built this place. They reached the sanctuary, the circular chamber with its intact dome and walls of knowledge. Jonah took up position just inside the narrow entrance, revolver ready. They're through the outer door, he reported, hearing distant shouts echoing through the passages. 2 minutes, maybe less. Miriam nodded to her daughter. Leora, the sequence. The girl moved to a section of wall where strange indentations formed a pattern among the carvings. With careful precision, she pressed them in the order they'd decoded from the inscriptions. A combination lock created millennia before such devices were thought to exist. For a breathless moment, nothing happened. Then a deep rumbling vibrated through the necropolis, not the destructive collapse of the previous incident, but something more controlled. A rhythmic sequence of stone shifting against stone. "It's working," Brother Matthias whispered in awe. In the passages leading to the sanctuary, shouts of alarm rose from Voss's men. The sound of falling stone and rushing water echoed through the necropolis. "The defense mechanisms," Miriam explained, seeing Jonah's questioning look. "The builders created a system to protect their knowledge sanctuary. When activated, it seals off certain passages and floods others." Jonah's eyes widened with professional appreciation. "These keepers of dawn were clever bastards, weren't they?" Shouts grew closer, panicked now rather than threatening. A man appeared at the far end of the passage leading to the sanctuary, his face pale with fear in the lantern light. "Voss," he called back over his shoulder. "There's people down here. The way's collapsing behind us." Ezekiel Voss pushed past the man, his fine clothes now dust-covered, his composure finally cracked. Two more men followed, looking desperately behind them as the passage began to narrow, walls literally closing in through some ancient mechanism. "What have you done?" Voss demanded, seeing Miriam and her companions in the sanctuary. "Nothing the builders didn't intend," she replied calmly. "This place protects itself against those who would plunder rather than preserve." The rumbling intensified. Small stones fell from the passage ceiling as the walls continued their inexorable movement. "Get in here," Jonah called to the men, surprising Miriam. "Quickly, before you're crushed." The men needed no second invitation, scrambling through the narrowing gap into the sanctuary. Voss hesitated, pride warring with survival instinct. "Voss!" Jonah shouted. "Move or die!" The councilman lunged forward, just as the passage shrank to a gap barely wide enough for a man. He squeezed through, losing his hat and dignity in the process. Tumbling onto the sanctuary floor as the passage sealed completely behind him, silence fell, broken only by the heavy breathing of Voss and his men. The rumbling had stopped. The necropolis had made its judgment, sealing them all within its most sacred chamber. "What happens now?" Voss asked, his voice stripped of authority. "Are we to die down here for your principles, Mrs. Duvall?" "No, Mr. Voss," Miriam replied, handing him a lantern. "Now you learn." She gestured toward the walls covered in carvings and inscriptions, the astronomical charts, the mathematical formulas, the medical knowledge of a civilization lost to time. "Before we find our way out, and there is a way, you're going to understand exactly what you nearly destroyed in your greed." She met his gaze steadily. Knowledge that outlived its creators by thousands of years. Wisdom they preserved at great cost, hoping someone worthy would eventually find it. "Worthy," Jonah echoed quietly, the word still resonating within him. Outside, in the town of Grayrock, people gathered at the edge of the Dead Fields, watching with confusion and growing concern as dust rose from the necropolis entrance. Some spoke of collapse, others of divine judgment. None yet understood that beneath the barren ground, history itself was being rewritten, and that those who had entered the necropolis would emerge transformed, if they emerged at all. 3 months after the confrontation beneath the earth, Miriam Duvall stood at the newly constructed entrance to the necropolis, watching as a group of university scholars carefully descended the reinforced stairway. Overhead, a simple wooden sign read, "Repository of the Keepers of Dawn, founded 1887. "Professor Wilson is particularly interested in the astronomical charts," Leora said, checking items off a list in her leather-bound notebook. At 17, she had grown into her role as assistant curator with remarkable poise. "I've directed him to begin in the eastern chamber where the star maps are most complete." Miriam nodded, pride warming her heart. "And the botanical specimens for Dr. Hargrove?" "Brother Matthias is showing her the medicinal engravings," Leora smiled. He says she's the first person he's met who properly appreciates the keeper's knowledge of plant properties. The change in Grayrock's attitude toward the necropolis had been gradual but profound. It began the day Miriam had led a chastened Ezekiel Voss and his men out of the sanctuary through the secondary passage, a humbled procession that emerged squinting into sunlight, covered in dust but transformed by what they had witnessed. Voss had said nothing as he departed, but the next day the warrant for Miriam's arrest mysteriously disappeared from the mayor's office. A week later, Voss left town on business and returned with 3 university professors eager to document the necropolis. His motives remained suspect, but Miriam had accepted the olive branch for what it was, acknowledgement that some discoveries transcended personal gain. Jonah's letter arrived, Miriam said, handing a travel-worn envelope to her daughter. From Mexico City, Leora eagerly broke the seal. "He's found references to another repository in Oaxaca," she exclaimed after scanning the contents. "He believes the keepers established sites across both continents." Jonah Coyle had departed Grayrock once the necropolis was secured, but not before helping Miriam establish protocols for its preservation. The treasure hunter had found something more valuable than gold in the ancient chambers, purpose beyond profit. A familiar black-clad figure appeared on the path from town. Father Alaric approached with measured steps, no longer hostile, but not entirely reconciled. "Mrs. Duvall," he greeted with a formal nod. "The bishop's representative arrives tomorrow. I trust you'll respect the church's interest in reviewing any religious implications of these discoveries." "Of course, Father," Miriam replied graciously. "Brother Matthias has prepared translations of passages specifically addressing spiritual beliefs. I think your superiors will find them more complementary to church teachings than initially feared." Alaric's expression remained skeptical, but he no longer spoke of curses and heresy. The discovery had challenged his rigid worldview, forcing uncomfortable growth. As the priest departed, Leora slipped her arm through her mother's. Would grandfather have imagined this? His theories proven, his work continued. He would have been prouder of you than of the discovery itself, Miriam answered softly. Together, they turned toward the necropolis entrance as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the dead fields, no longer dead, but alive with purpose and promise. The land that had cost Miriam her last $7 now housed a legacy beyond price, knowledge preserved across millennia, waiting for those worthy to receive it. "Come," Miriam said, lifting a lantern. "There are chambers we haven't fully documented yet." Mother and daughter descended into the earth, their light pushing back darkness as the ancient wisdom of the Keepers of Dawn continued its long journey into the future, preserved by those who valued truth above treasure. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.